The fire had taken everything from Marcus Reed 3 years ago, his career, his confidence, and nearly his life. So it was ironic that fire would be what brought meaning back to his existence. The night sky above his remote cabin flashed brilliant orange, then blue, then a sickly green that had no business being in Earth's atmosphere. Marcus stepped onto his porch, coffee mug lowered and forgotten in his hand, as something tore through the clouds above his property, trailing sparks like a cosmic match struck against the darkness. "What the hell?" he whispered, watching the object arc downward and disappear behind the pine-covered ridge a mile from his home. The impact came seconds later, not with the thunderous boom he expected, but with a strange wheezing sound, like air escaping a pressurized chamber. Marcus told himself to go back inside. Whatever had crashed wasn't his problem. He'd left problems behind in Boston when he'd moved to these Montana woods. But the former firefighter in him wouldn't let it rest. If something was burning in his forest. The trek through the underbrush took him 40 minutes. He followed the scorched treetops, the strange metallic debris, and the lingering smell of something like burned cinnamon. When he crested the small hill overlooking a natural clearing, Marcus froze. The craft was about the size of a small bus, its hull glistening with what looked like liquid metal that pulsed with an internal light. Most of it remained intact, but one section had been torn open, revealing a jumble of technology unlike anything he'd seen before. It wasn't burning as he'd feared, but portions of it seemed to be dissolving, as if the very air was digesting it. "Hello?" he called out, immediately feeling foolish. What was he expecting? A reply in English? A sound like crackling flames answered him from behind a fallen log. Marcus circled wide, one hand on the hunting knife at his belt, until he saw her. She was humanoid, shockingly so, but her skin had a translucent quality that revealed a network of glowing veins beneath, pulsing with amber light. Where a human would have hair, she had what appeared to be delicate tendrils that moved slightly, as if floating in water. They glowed at the tips with tiny points of light. Her eyes, when they fluttered open at his approach, were entirely golden with no visible pupils. "Stay back," she said in perfect, accented English, holding up a 6-fingered hand that leaked wisps of smoke. "I'm unstable." Marcus stopped, mouth open in shock. "You speak language adaptation," she interrupted, wincing as she tried to move. A patch of her skin near her shoulder flared bright orange momentarily. "Emergency protocol. Please, I need cooling." Her eyes rolled back, and the ground beneath her began to smolder. Against every instinct for self-preservation, Marcus rushed forward. The heat coming off her body was intense, like opening an oven door. He shrugged off his jacket, dunked it in a nearby puddle, and draped it over her. Steam hissed upward, but the alien's glow dimmed slightly. "What are you?" he asked, knowing she couldn't hear him in her unconscious state. Making a decision he was certain he'd regret, Marcus carefully lifted the alien. She was surprisingly light, almost hollow feeling, but hot enough that he could barely stand to touch her even through the wet jacket. When he shifted her, something fell from a compartment in what he assumed was her clothing, a small crystal that glowed with the same amber light as her veins. He pocketed it and began the arduous journey back to his cabin, every step questioning his sanity. Whoever she was, she needed help. And despite everything life had thrown at him, Marcus Reed had never been able to ignore someone in danger. By the time he reached his cabin, his arms were covered in minor burns, and the alien's temperature had risen to the point where the jacket was now completely dry and beginning to smoke. He kicked open his door and laid her on the metal-topped kitchen table, the only surface he thought might withstand her heat. As he filled every container he could find with cold water, Marcus glanced at the unconscious alien on his table and whispered to the empty room, "What exactly am I supposed to do with a girl who burns?" The crystal in his pocket pulsed once, as if in answer, and for a brief moment, Marcus could have sworn he heard a voice in his mind, "Save her. Before they come for her. Before she burns your world." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, momentarily masking the sound of vehicles moving through the distant forest. Marcus spent the night cycling between panic and fascination as he tended to the alien he now knew as Lyri. The cold compresses barely managed her temperature, which fluctuated wildly with her unconscious state. By dawn, he had emptied his freezer of ice packs and resorted to using bags of frozen vegetables to keep her from igniting his cabin. "Easy now," he murmured as she stirred, her amber veins pulsing brighter. The light tendrils around her head curled and uncurled in response to his voice. Her golden eyes opened, focusing with unnerving precision. "You helped me." "Yeah, well, old habits," Marcus replied, changing a compress that had begun to steam. "I used to run into burning buildings for a living." Lyri attempted to sit up but fell back with a gasp as a spot on her side flared orange. Tiny embers drifted from her fingertips. "Careful!" Marcus exclaimed. "You're still unstable." "I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice melodic despite the strain. "Your atmosphere. It's too oxygen-rich for my kind. It amplifies our natural thermal regulation." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You mean you're not normally a walking fire hazard?" A sound like gentle crackling emerged from her laughter, he realized. "On my world, we burn only when we choose to," she explained. "Here, my emotions trigger combustion I cannot fully control." Marcus sat on a stool beside the table. "And what world is that exactly?" "Paralis. Fourth planet in the Cygnus system." She gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. "Or what remains of it." "What happened?" Lyri's veins darkened to a deep red. "The harvesters found us. They." Her skin began to smoke, and Marcus quickly applied fresh ice packs. "Hey, it's okay. You don't have to talk about it now." The crystal Marcus had found pulsed in his pocket. He placed it on the table, and Lyri's tendrils reached toward it instinctively. "My memory core," she whispered. "You saved it." Marcus was about to respond and the distant sound of helicopter rotors reached his ears. He moved to the window and swore under his breath. 3 black SUVs were winding up the forest road, and a helicopter circled overhead. "We need to move," he said, grabbing a duffel bag and stuffing it with essentials. "Whatever you crashed in has attracted attention." Lyri's eyes widened. "You must leave me. If they capture me, they'll only imprison one. If they find you helping me." "Not happening," Marcus interrupted, wrapping her in a wet sheet. "I didn't drag you through a mile of forest just to hand you over to some government spooks." He hesitated, then grabbed the metal box from under his bed where he kept remnants of his past life, including his firefighter's proximity suit. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it might contain Lyri's heat signature long enough to escape. As they slipped out the back door into the dense forest, Marcus couldn't help wondering why he was risking everything for an alien he'd just met. Maybe it was the firefighter in him, never able to leave someone in danger. Or maybe it was the emptiness of the past 3 years, suddenly filled with purpose. They made it half a mile before the sound of tracking dogs echoed through the trees. "They're following your heat signature," Marcus explained, helping Lyri into a shallow cave beside a small stream. "I can attempt to lower my core temperature," she said, "but it might render me unconscious." Before Marcus could respond, voices approached their hiding place. He pressed deeper into the shadows, pulling Lyri behind him. Through the foliage, he could see a woman in a dark suit directing men with sophisticated scanning equipment. "Director Powell wants the anomaly contained by nightfall," she ordered. "Thermal imaging shows it moved through here recently. And it's not alone." Marcus held his breath as the scanner swept toward their hiding place. At that moment, Lyri pressed the memory crystal to her chest and her glow diminished to almost nothing. Her body temperature dropped so rapidly that Marcus could feel the chill against his back. The scanner passed over them, registering nothing unusual. When the search team moved on, Marcus turned to find Leary barely conscious, her normally amber veins now a dull bronze. "That was too close," he whispered, checking her pulse, faster than human, but steady. "They'll find us eventually," she murmured. "I cannot hide my nature forever." "Then we need help," Marcus decided. "Someone who understands your biology better than I do." Leary's eyes drifted closed. "Why are you doing this? Risking yourself?" Marcus thought about the fire that had ended his career, the apartment complex he couldn't save, the victims whose screams still haunted his dreams. He'd failed them. He wouldn't fail again. "Let's just say I've got some karma to balance," he replied. As night fell, he made his decision. There was only one person he knew with both the scientific knowledge and the discretion they needed, Professor Aidan Jackson, an old friend who'd once consulted with his fire department on unusual combustion cases. Marcus activated his emergency satellite phone, hoping that 3 years of silence hadn't ruined that friendship. "Jackson? It's Reed. I need your help with something unusual." He glanced at Leary's sleeping form. "And bring whatever equipment you use for studying exothermic reactions. We've got a situation that's about to get very hot." Professor Aidan Jackson hadn't changed much in 3 years, still the same wild gray hair, the same perpetually distracted expression, the same tendency to speak in rapid-fire sentences punctuated with scientific terminology. What had changed was his reaction to the extraordinary. "Fascinating," he exclaimed for perhaps the 20th time, adjusting his glasses as he examined the readings from the portable scanner he'd pressed against Leary's arm. They were huddled in the basement laboratory of Jackson's remote lake house, a 2-hour drive from Marcus's cabin. "Her cellular structure appears to utilize a form of controlled fusion rather than oxidation for energy production. It's like nothing I've ever seen." Leary watched him with a mixture of amusement and wariness. Her condition had stabilized somewhat in the cooler environment of the basement, but occasional flares of orange still pulsed beneath her translucent skin. "On Paralis, we are considered rather ordinary," she said. "It is your carbon-based biology that would be studied as exotic." Jackson chuckled. "I suppose perspective is everything." He turned to Marcus, who was pacing near the stairs. "The good news is that I think I understand what's happening. Her species evolved in an environment with minimal free oxygen, so their metabolic processes adapted differently. Here on Earth, our atmosphere is supercharging her natural thermal regulation." "Can you fix it?" Marcus asked bluntly. "Fix is a strong word," Jackson replied, tapping his scanner. "But I believe I can create a compound that would temporarily dampen her thermal reactions, something like an internal fire retardant." Leary's tendrils curled anxiously. "How temporary?" "Hard to say without more research. Days, perhaps a week." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "That might be enough time to figure out our next move." He didn't mention that he had no idea what that move should be. Getting Leary off-planet seemed impossible, but keeping her hidden indefinitely wasn't sustainable either. Jackson began gathering chemicals from various cabinets. "I'll need a few hours to synthesize the compound. In the meantime, you should rest. Both of you look exhausted." Marcus hadn't realized how tired he was until that moment. The adrenaline of the past 24 hours was wearing off, leaving him drained. He followed Leary upstairs to the spare bedroom Jackson had prepared, with fire-resistant materials hastily covering every surface. "You should sleep," he told her, noticing how her glow had dimmed. "I'll keep watch." Leary settled onto the bed, her tendrils spreading across the pillow like a halo of dim light. "Marcus," she said softly, "there is something I must tell you. About why I fled." He sat at the edge of the bed, careful to maintain distance from her still warm skin. "I'm listening." "My people are energy beings," she began, her golden eyes fixed on the ceiling. "We evolved to harness the thermal energy of our world. For millennia, we lived in harmony with Paralis, taking only what we needed. Then the harvesters came. Her veins flickered with remembered fear, and Marcus instinctively reached for the spray bottle of coolant Jackson had provided. They saw us as nothing but fuel, Leary continued after calming. They discovered that our bodies produce 10 times the energy of their most efficient reactors. They began capturing us, experimenting, finding ways to extract our essence while keeping us alive but in constant pain. Marcus felt sick. They're farming your people. Leary nodded, a very human gesture she must have learned from observing him. I was a scientist, working on deep space navigation. When the harvesters attacked my research station, I escaped in a prototype vessel. I thought Earth would be safe, distant enough from their territory and similar enough to Paralis that I could survive. But now they might follow you here, Marcus realized. Yes. The harvesters track energy signatures across space. Eventually, they will detect mine. Leary's voice dropped to a whisper. I've doomed your world by coming here. Before Marcus could respond, the security system beeped. Jackson had installed primitive but effective motion sensors around the property. Someone was approaching. Marcus moved to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. 3 black SUVs had pulled up at the edge of the property, and figures in tactical gear were deploying in a standard search formation. They found us, he muttered. But how? The answer came from downstairs as Jackson called up urgently, Marcus. My university login, they must have monitored it when I accessed research on exotic thermal signatures. Marcus cursed under his breath. He should have anticipated this. Jackson was brilliant but terrible at operational security. We need to move, now, he told Leary, helping her to her feet. Is there a back way out? He called to Jackson. The boat dock, came the reply as Jackson hurried upstairs, clutching a small case. I've got the compound, but it's untested. Leary's eyes met Marcus's. No choice, she said, taking the syringe Jackson offered. Without hesitation, she injected the bluish liquid into her arm. The effect was immediate and alarming. Her entire body flared brilliant orange, then dimmed to an ashen gray. The tendrils around her head drooped lifelessly. Leary. Marcus caught her as she swayed. Normal reaction, Jackson assured him, though he didn't sound entirely confident. Her system is recalibrating. Shouts from outside indicated the agents were surrounding the house. Director Powell's voice cut through a megaphone, Professor Jackson, this is a matter of national security. We know you're harboring a non-terrestrial entity. Surrender it immediately. Marcus hefted Leary into his arms, surprised at how cool her skin felt now, almost too cool. The boat, he said. Can you create a distraction? Jackson's eyes gleamed with unexpected mischief. My life's work is understanding combustion, Marcus. Distraction is my specialty. As Marcus carried Leary toward the back door, Jackson grabbed several chemicals from his lab, mixing them in a large beaker. You have exactly 2 minutes before this creates a rather spectacular thermal reaction. Get to the boat and head for the old fishing cabin on the north shore. Marcus nodded, knowing this might be the last time he saw his friend. Thank you, Aiden. Just keep her safe, Jackson replied, his expression serious. She may be the most important scientific discovery in human history, but more than that, she needs our help. Marcus slipped out the back door with Leary cradled against him, her body temperature now worryingly low. Behind them, he heard Jackson greeting the agents with exaggerated cordiality, buying them precious seconds. They had just reached the small motorboat when the world erupted in light and heat. Jackson's distraction sent a column of multicolored flame shooting through the roof of the lake house, temporarily blinding the agents and setting off every alarm in the vicinity. Marcus gunned the boat's motor, heading into the darkness of the lake as chaos erupted behind them. In his arms, Leary stirred weakly. He sacrificed himself, she murmured. Jackson's tougher than he looks, Marcus replied, hoping it was true. And he just bought us the time we need. As they sped across the black water, Leary's memory crystal pulsed with increasing urgency. Something was coming, something worse than government agents. And time was running out. The abandoned fishing cabin on the north shore of Lake Meridian hadn't seen visitors in years, judging by the thick layer of dust and the raccoon family that scattered as Marcus kicked the door open. It wasn't much, just a single room with a rusted wood stove, a sagging cot, and fishing gear hanging from hooks in the wall, but it was hidden from the main roads by dense pine forest. "Home sweet home," Marcus muttered, laying Leary on the cot. Her skin had taken on a disturbing grayish hue, and the once vibrant amber of her veins now pulsed weakly, like dying embers. "The compound," she rasped, her golden eyes struggling to focus, "it's too strong." Marcus cursed Jackson's hasty chemistry. The solution had certainly prevented her from combusting, but it seemed to be smothering her internal fire as well. He placed a hand on her forehead, alarmed at how cold she felt. "What do you need?" he asked, searching the cabin for anything useful. "How do I help you?" Leary's tendrils twitched feebly. "Heat. Controlled heat." Her voice was barely a whisper. "My people, we feed on thermal energy." Marcus glanced at the wood stove. It was ancient but might still work. He quickly gathered the driest wood he could find outside, started a fire, and moved the cot as close to the stove as was safe. "Hold on," he told her, stoking the flames higher. "Just hold on." As warmth filled the cabin, Leary's color gradually improved. The grayness receded, and her natural amber glow began to return, though far dimmer than before. Marcus felt a surge of relief as she sat up, her movements still weak but steadier. "Thank you," she said, extending her hands toward the fire. "Your quick thinking saved me." "Seems to be becoming a habit," he replied with a half-smile, sitting beside her. "How are you feeling?" "Balanced, for now. The compound is neutralizing the effects of your atmosphere, but it's also dampening my natural energy process." She looked at him, her expression solemn. "It's not sustainable, Marcus. I need to either find a way back to space or—" She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. Marcus had seen enough of her biology to understand the implications. Without a solution, she would eventually burn out, either in a catastrophic combustion that could destroy everything around her, or by slowly fading away as Jackson's compound suppressed her vital processes. "We'll figure something out," he promised, not entirely believing his own words. Leary reached for her memory crystal, which pulsed more urgently now. "There isn't much time." The harvesters. A blinding light suddenly flooded the cabin, accompanied by the deafening thrum of helicopter rotors. Searchlights swept across the windows as a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Marcus Reed. This is Director Elaine Powell of the Special Containment Division. The area is surrounded. Surrender the extraterrestrial entity immediately." Marcus peered through a gap in the window boards. At least a dozen agents in tactical gear were positioning themselves around the cabin, and 2 helicopters circled overhead. They'd been found far sooner than he'd expected. How did they track us, he wondered aloud. Leary's expression was grim. "Not them," she said, pointing to her crystal, which now pulsed with an increasingly frantic rhythm. "The harvesters. My crash damaged my ship's cloaking system. They've detected my signature." As if confirming her words, the crystal projected a holographic star chart showing a red dot moving rapidly toward Earth's position. The implications were chilling. Whatever was hunting Leary was close, perhaps only hours away. "We need to warn them," Marcus realized. "Powell's people need to know what's coming." Before he could move, the cabin door burst open. Agents poured in, weapons trained on them both. Director Powell followed, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She assessed Leary with clinical interest before turning to Marcus. "Mr. Reed, you've led us on quite a chase," she said coolly. Professor Jackson was most uncooperative, even after we assured him we mean no harm to his guest. "Is he alive?" Marcus demanded. "Quite. Though his laboratory will require substantial renovation." Powell approached Leary without fear, studying her dimmed glow. "Fascinating. Our scientists will be eager to begin their examination." Leary's veins flashed crimson momentarily. "Your scientists should be preparing defenses," she said. "The harvesters are coming, and they will not distinguish between me and your people once they arrive." Powell raised an eyebrow. "Harvesters?" "Ma'am, we need to get the specimen to the facility," an agent interrupted. "Thermal readings are fluctuating." "She's not a specimen," Marcus shouted, stepping between Leary and the agents. "She's a refugee, and she's trying to warn you about a threat to Earth." Powell signaled, and two agents restrained Marcus while others approached Leary with what looked like a containment pod. As they reached for her, Leary's temperature spiked suddenly. The compound was wearing off faster than expected, and her fear was triggering her natural defenses. "Don't touch her," Marcus warned. "She can't control her reactions when threatened." The warning came too late. As an agent grabbed Leary's arm, her skin flared white-hot. The agent recoiled with a cry, his protective glove smoking. Leary stumbled back, her entire body beginning to glow dangerously bright. "Containment protocol," Powell ordered, and agents rushed forward with fire-suppressant equipment. "No." Marcus struggled against his captors. "You'll kill her." In the chaos, no one noticed Leary's crystal projecting a new message, a countdown, pulsing in alien numerals but unmistakable in its urgency. Not hours until the harvesters arrived. Minutes. The agents managed to subdue Leary with some kind of cooling foam that extinguished her flare-up. She went limp, her glow fading to almost nothing as they loaded her into the containment pod. "You're making a mistake," Marcus told Powell as agents dragged him toward a separate vehicle. "She came here for help, not to be dissected in some government lab." "Your concern is noted," Powell replied dispassionately. "But national security takes precedence over your newfound alien friendship." As they forced him into an SUV, Marcus caught a final glimpse of Leary's pod being loaded into a helicopter. Her eyes, barely visible through the reinforced window, met his for a moment, filled not with fear for herself, but with concern for him and for the world that was about to face a threat it couldn't comprehend. The convoy of vehicles pulled away from the cabin, heading toward what Powell had called the facility. In the night sky above, something bright flashed momentarily between the stars, too fast for human instruments to detect, but heralding an arrival that would change everything. Marcus closed his eyes, formulating a desperate plan. He had failed to save lives once before, in that burning apartment building 3 years ago. He wouldn't fail again, not when the stakes were the entire planet. The harvesters were coming. And Leary was humanity's only hope of understanding what they faced. The SCD facility, a concrete and steel monolith buried in the side of a mountain, hummed with activity as scientists and military personnel rushed to prepare for what most still considered an unverified extraterrestrial threat. Director Powell had given the warning some credence, but without concrete evidence beyond Leary's claims and the mysterious crystal, the response remained measured. Too measured, in Marcus's opinion. From his holding cell, he could hear snippets of conversations as guards passed, discussions of testing protocols for the specimen and debates about the authenticity of the threat. No one seemed to grasp the urgency of the situation, even as Leary's countdown ticked toward 0. His opportunity came during a shift change. A young guard, more curious than cautious, responded to Marcus's complaints of chest pain. When the cell door opened, Marcus used the firefighter's technique he'd learned for moving through smoke-filled rooms: stay low, move fast, and never hesitate. 2 minutes later, wearing the guard's security badge and cap pulled low over his face, Marcus navigated the labyrinthine corridors following signs for containment level B. His heart pounded with every checkpoint he passed, expecting alarms to sound at any moment. He found her in a glass-walled laboratory, strapped to an examination table surrounded by monitoring equipment. Scientists in hazmat suits hovered around her, adjusting dials and collecting samples. Leary's normally vibrant body looked almost extinguished, her skin ashen, tendrils limp, the glow of her veins reduced to the faintest pulse. Through an observation window, Marcus spotted a familiar wild-haired figure arguing with a technician, Professor Jackson, apparently recruited rather than imprisoned after the lake house incident. Marcus caught his eye and motioned urgently. Jackson's eyes widened in recognition, but to his credit, he maintained his composure. He finished his conversation and casually made his way to the maintenance door where Marcus waited. "You have precisely 30 seconds before that guard wakes up," Marcus said without preamble. "Tell me you found a way to help her." Jackson nodded, passing him a small sealed container. "A modified version of the compound, balanced this time. It won't suppress her natural functions, just stabilize them." "But Marcus," his expression grew grave, "she's weakening rapidly. The testing has drained her, and without a sufficient heat source to replenish her energy." "One problem at a time," Marcus replied, pocketing the container. "Can you create a distraction?" Jackson's lips quirked into a half-smile. "As I recall, my last distraction cost me a lake house. But yes, the sprinkler system in Section C is rather sensitive to certain chemical reactions." As Jackson hurried away, Marcus waited for his signal. He didn't have to wait long. Alarms blared as emergency sprinklers activated throughout the adjacent wing. In the ensuing confusion, Marcus slipped into the laboratory. The scientists had abandoned their stations to secure their data from the water, leaving Leary momentarily unattended. Marcus rushed to her side, quickly releasing the restraints. "Marcus?" Her voice was barely audible, her golden eyes struggling to focus. "You shouldn't be here." "Seems to be becoming a habit," he echoed their earlier conversation, supporting her as she tried to stand. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, leaning heavily against him. "The crystal, they took it for analysis." Marcus spotted it across the room, connected to various instruments. He grabbed it, wincing as it burned hot in his hand, much hotter than before. The countdown was nearly complete. "We need to warn them," Leary insisted as they made their way toward the exit. "The harvesters. First we need to get you somewhere safe," Marcus countered, helping her through the doorway. "Then we'll." The entire facility shuddered, lights flickering as a deep, resonant hum penetrated the mountain itself. Emergency sirens joined the sprinkler alarms, creating a cacophony of warning. "They're here," Leary whispered, her eyes fixed on the crystal, which now pulsed with an intense, steady light. They had barely reached the corridor when they encountered Director Powell, flanked by armed guards. "Mr. Reed," she said, remarkably composed despite the chaos. "I believe the situation has evolved beyond your unauthorized rescue attempt." To Marcus's surprise, she motioned the guards to stand down. "Our deep space monitoring detected 3 unidentified craft entering orbit 10 minutes ago. They've disabled our satellite network and are descending to these coordinates." She turned to Leary. "I believe your warnings were accurate." Leary straightened, summoning her remaining strength. "The harvesters won't negotiate. They see your planet as a resource, nothing more. If they can't locate me, they'll begin taking your people instead." "What do they want with you specifically?" Powell asked. "I possess something they value, knowledge of their weaknesses." Leary touched the crystal. "My research team discovered that the harvesters' ships are vulnerable to a specific frequency of thermal pulse. We were developing a defense system when they attacked our station." The building shook again, more violently this time. Dust sifted from the ceiling. They're scanning for her energy signature, Marcus realized. That's how they track her kind. Powell made a rapid decision. Dr. Jackson, she called to the professor, who had appeared at the end of the hallway, is there a way to mask her thermal signature? Jackson stepped forward, face grim. Not mask it, no. But perhaps redirect it. What followed was a desperate race against time. While military forces immobilized on the surface, Jackson and a team of SCD scientists worked to adapt the facility's thermal imaging technology into a broadcasting array. The plan was audacious: amplify Leary's unique energy signature and project it as a decoy, while simultaneously using her knowledge to target the Harvester's vulnerability. It will require a significant energy source, Leary explained, her strength returning somewhat after Marcus administered Jackson's improved compound. More than I can generate in my weakened state. The facility has geothermal backup generators, Powell offered. Not enough, Leary shook her head. The pulse must be precise, an exact replica of my species' thermal signature but amplified 1,000-fold. Marcus understood before she said it. You want to overload. Leary met his gaze steadily. A controlled burn. If I absorb enough energy at once, I can convert it into the exact pulse needed to disable their ships. But you said your people can't control combustion in our atmosphere, Marcus protested. I can't, she agreed. But you can. You're a firefighter, Marcus. You understand how to direct a burn. The next hour passed in a blur of preparations. The facility's largest testing chamber was converted into a controlled environment. Heat elements were positioned according to Marcus's specifications, designed to create a directed thermal funnel. Jackson's team built a rudimentary amplifier connected to the facility's broadcast array. On the surface, the first reports came in of landings, massive ships descending near major population centers. Initial contact attempts had been met with silence. They're scanning, Leary explained, now connected to the amplifier by a web of sensors. Identifying the highest concentrations of thermal signatures, your cities. How long do we have? Powell asked. Minutes. Once they begin extraction, they won't stop. Marcus stood beside Leary as technicians made final adjustments. There has to be another way, he said quietly. She reached for his hand, her touch warm but no longer burning. My world is gone, Marcus. But yours doesn't have to be. Will it kill you? He asked bluntly. Her tendrils curved in what he now recognized as a smile. My people don't die as yours do. We transform. Energy can neither be created or destroyed, isn't that your physics? Before he could respond, alarms blared. On monitors around the room, they watched as massive mechanical appendages extended from the Harvester ships, reaching toward the ground. Now, Leary said with quiet determination. The chamber sealed. Marcus took his position at the control panel, mentally recalling everything he knew about directing a fire's path. This was what he had trained for, controlling the uncontrollable, channeling destruction into purpose. Ready when you are, he told her, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Leary stood in the center of the chamber, arms extended. Begin. Marcus activated the heat elements sequentially, creating a rising spiral of thermal energy. Leary absorbed it, her body beginning to glow, first amber, then orange, then a brilliant white that forced everyone to shield their eyes. The temperature in the chamber rose rapidly, approaching levels that would melt the reinforced walls. Through the observation window, Marcus watched as Leary's form began to change, the humanoid shape dissolving into pure energy, tendrils extending to connect with the amplifier. Energy readings off the scale, a technician reported. Directed burn, Marcus commanded, adjusting controls to funnel the incredible heat toward the broadcast array. Channel it. On the monitors, they watched as the Harvester ships suddenly paused their extraction attempt. Their mechanical appendages retracted as if in confusion. Lyri's crystal, now floating freely in the center of the energy vortex that had been her physical form, pulsed with a precise rhythm, targeting information transmitted directly to the amplifier. Broadcasting the pulse now, Jackson confirmed. The chamber blazed with light so intense it penetrated the shielding. Marcus held his position, making micro-adjustments to maintain the burn's direction, even as sweat poured down his face and his skin reddened from the residual heat. On the monitors, the harvester ships shuddered. Electrical discharges coursed across their hulls. One by one, their systems failed, engines sputtering as they lost altitude, crashing into uninhabited areas, as if the targeting had been deliberately precise. "It's working," someone shouted. In the chamber, the energy that had been Lyri coalesced one final time into a vaguely humanoid shape. Her voice, somehow projected through the intercom despite the inferno, was clear. "Remember us, Marcus Reed. Remember that not all fires destroy. Some transform. Some create new beginnings." The light intensified to an impossible brilliance, then collapsed inward. A pulse of energy shot through the amplifier and broadcast array, reaching beyond the atmosphere to disable the remaining harvester ships in orbit. Then, silence. The heat elements automatically shut down. Emergency cooling systems activated, filling the chamber with suppressant fog. When it cleared, the chamber was empty except for the crystal, now dark and still on the scorched floor. Marcus stood motionless at the controls, a strange peace settling over him despite the loss. He had not failed this time. Lives had been saved, a world protected. And somewhere, somehow, Lyri continued, transformed but not extinguished. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of what was now called the Paralis Research Center, built around the remains of the harvester ships. Scientists from around the world worked to understand the technology, while military forces remained vigilant for any sign of return. Professor Jackson approached, carrying a small containment unit. "The analysis is complete," he said, opening the unit to reveal Lyri's crystal. "It's not just a memory storage device as we thought. It's a seed, for lack of a better term." Marcus took the crystal, which felt warm in his palm. "A seed? Her people don't reproduce as we do," Jackson explained. "They transfer their essence, their knowledge, into these crystals when they're ready to transform. Under the right conditions, specific thermal parameters, new life can emerge." Marcus stared at the crystal, noticing the faintest amber glow beginning to pulse at its center. She knew, he realized. She planned this all along. "The question is," Jackson said, "what do we do with it?" Marcus closed his hand around the crystal, feeling the gentle warmth spreading through his palm. "We keep it safe. We learn. And when the time is right," he looked up at the stars becoming visible in the evening sky, "we help her find her way home." The crystal pulsed once in his hand, as if in agreement. Not an ending, but a transformation. Not destruction, but renewal. Like a fire that clears the old to make way for new growth, some endings were really beginnings in disguise.